The following episode contains difficult subject matter. Please take care while listening.
I mean, it's like the opening of an incredible movie. Here's a woman with no criminal record. Here's a cop who's like a good guy, and they go to meet for a drink, and then the next thing anyone knows, he's dead and she's covered in blood. The only plausible shooter is this woman. What the hell happened?
Okay, imagine this. You meet a guy, he's cute, he is insanely rich, and he lives on a tropical island. You guys fall in love, have babies, and live full-time in a place where the sun always shines and the beach is just steps from your front door. Perfect, right? Well, you got to know that if I'm talking about it on this podcast, then it's 100% not perfect. Josh Dean is here to talk to me now about his new podcast, White Devil, about a love affair turned toxic. Josh, welcome to Crime Story.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So let's start with Jasmine, who I just want to point out is a Canadian, which was a nice little surprise for us little Canadians up here. Who is she?
So Jasmine Harden is a Canadian woman from Kingston, I believe.
Kingston, Ontario, yeah.
Which means something to many people here, and to you, I suspect. It's in Ontario. I know that.
It is. It's between Toronto and Ottawa. There you go, if that helps you navigate any of it.
It does. She grew up on a farm, so middle class, lower middle class Canadian woman. She's in her 30s. She is attractive, charismatic, highly social and personable, and at some point after a breakup finds herself in Belize, where the fairy tale that you just described begins. Well, it looked like a fairy tale at first.
It looked like a fairy tale. So she meets a guy named Andrew Ashcroft. Tell me about who he is and where his family is and who they are.
Very different background. Andrew Ashcroft is the son of a billionaire from the United Kingdom named Michael Ashcroft, Lord Michael Ashcroft, who is one of the wealthiest people in the UK, worth north of $2 billion. And a lot of his business has been based for at least the last few decades in the Caribbean and especially in Belize. And that's because his father was in the Foreign Office, and when it was known as British Honduras, was based there. And so young Michael Ashcroft, back in, I guess that would be the 1950s, was literally put on a boat and sent to Belize and had an attachment to it. And then much later, when he becomes wealthy, he decides to go back and become a mogul. And Andrew is his son.
Who's kind of a bit of a loser.
Listen, it's we wanted to be fair, and I think we were. I didn't go into this show with any preconceived biases about who anyone was. But I think, I say on the show, Kendall Roy on Succession, that's maybe giving Andrew more credit than he deserves, because at least Kendall seems to be somewhat good at business.
And kind of kept trying businesses for his dad, right? And then failing and his dad saving him.
Yeah, that's the perception. I should note that it's a really hard family to get concrete information about. Michael Ashcroft, famously secretive, famously protective of his image, highly litigious. So anecdotally, what I have been told is that Andrew has been handed a variety of jobs and he's not been very good at them. And Belize was meant to be a turning point. So he meets this Canadian woman, Jasmine Harden. They live together. They have children together. They have twins. And they are going to start this big, beautiful resort together. And as has been explained to me by Jasmine and others, that was sort of Andrew's proving to his father that, see, I can do something.
But at first it does seem that way, right? Like they actually do start a resort or build a resort, and there's publicity around it. And they do seem to be sort of this power couple that's hit the island.
They're this power couple on San Pedro. So if anyone's been to Belize, they would know San Pedro as the main town on Ambergris Caye. And that's where everybody goes. Big fishing destination, beautiful beaches, big party destination. And so this would have been an upscale, well, it is an upscale luxury resort in San Pedro known as Awry. And Jasmine and Andrew develop it, open it, and then everything goes sideways.
Yeah. So tell me about that. I mean, they become part of the community. They're well known. They have friends. They have, they live there. The kids, are they going to school yet? They're still young at this point.
Well, yeah, I actually, although you just made me think of something, and I think this is an important small detail, which is that, kids were going to start school, and there's a speech Andrew gives at the opening of Awry, not very long before the event we're about to talk about, where he says, these children will be the fourth generation of Ashcrofts to grow up in Belize. And I think this is like a small but not unimportant thing to focus on, because the children will become part of our conversation, I think, is that Michael Ashcroft's parents bring him to Belize, and therefore it's part of his soul and what he considers himself to be. He's British Belizean. He's the third generation Belizean British Ashcroft. And then these kids will be the fourth. So at the opening of Awry in April of 2021, Andrew makes that point. And then about a month later, on May 28th, 2021, Andrew and Jasmine go to a party. They come back to their luxury condo. A friend of theirs is staying there. He's a police officer named Henry Jamat. He's Black. They both know him quite well. He's a fairly senior police officer. He had been the second ranking cop on the island, and then he got sent to a new location out in the rainforest. And they still keep in touch with him. He had been helpful to Jasmine fairly recently. He says, "Come meet me for a drink." Andrew says, "No, I'm tired," or whatever. He doesn't go. Jasmine's like, "Sure, I'll meet you." She goes out to meet Henry. They go to the pier at the Awry Resort. There's no one else there. There was, I think, a half bottle of wine unfinished, a few tiny bottles of whatever that terrible cinnamon liqueur is, Fireball.
Fireball.
And Henry ends up dead. A gunshot wound to the head. There are no witnesses. There are no cameras. Someone hears a gunshot, and by the time a guard gets to the beach, all they see is Jasmine covered in blood. Henry, this police officer, dead and floating in the water. I mean, it's like the opening of an incredible movie, right? Like, here's a woman with no criminal record who's not in any way been in trouble in Belize or Canada. Here's a cop who's like a good guy and was a friend of both her and Andrew and many other people on the island. They go to meet for a drink, and then the next thing anyone knows, he's dead and she's covered in blood. The only plausible shooter is this woman. What the hell happened? And that's where the story starts.
What does she say happened?
So she has maintained from the beginning that it was an accident. But a story got out that she had said, "Oh, a boat came by. I think it was a shooter for the boat." But by the end of that night, she's like, "No, it was a terrible accident." And ultimately, she's arrested, is charged with manslaughter by negligence. So basically, that is an accident involving recklessness of some kind.
What I found great about the way you told the story was that in episode 1, you sort of set it up like the way that the Islanders would have thought it was supposed to happen. Is this wealthy woman from a wealthy family kills a local cop, and in a couple of days she's let off the hook, and it's like, yes, it was an accident, and you're like, that's the way they expected it to go. But it in no way does it end up like that, because the system, the Belize, everything seems to be against her, and it sort of turns into a Kafkaesque like battle for her freedom.
Exactly. I mean, when we went into the story, and I think this is important, as certain people, including, pretty much anyone in the Ashcroft orbit would tell you today that this is some biased story that we set out to like make Jasmine into some hero, and that it's just a hack job against the family, and like that is not true at all. Like when myself and Joe, my producer, fell into this, I had no idea what to expect. It was literally a headline sent to me by someone from the New York Post, and I was like, "Huh, that's interesting." And then I just followed it for a couple of days, and was like, "This is an incredible mystery. What happened on that pier?" But within a week, I was talking to a local reporter, and it became clear to me that almost certainly this was an accident. So what I could have done at that point was just kind of lose interest, because like, not that doesn't make it an interesting news story, but that's not necessarily a podcast. Because if I told you, and anyone listening to this is like, "Great, you told me the end," right? You'd like,
yeah,
it's an incredible setup. There's a dead cop and a woman, and there's no witnesses who killed him and why. If I told you that I think it's an accident and so do the cops, you might be like, "Oh, well, why would I listen to your 12-part podcast then?" It's because it's one of those rare instances where I didn't turn away for some reason, and I just kept following it. And the closer I got to it, the weirder it started to get. And so basically what you just said is true. Everyone assumed, a million theories are thrown around that first week. Well, Andrew killed him. There was a hitman, like a plane landed. There was a boat. It was being treated like a mystery, except that no one close to it actually thought it was a mystery. But the other thing everyone was saying is exactly what you just said, which is she's rich, she's white, he's black, she's going to get away with it. Well, that's not what happened.
Yeah, and just for a second, like just the idea that she was part of the Ashcroft family, like you talk about how nothing in Belize, nothing happens that doesn't touch them and their pocketbook, right? Like you can't buy anything, you can't trade anything, you can't see anything that isn't very directly related to the Ashcrofts.
Right. Thank you for bringing that up, because like this is such an important thing to understand, which is that it would be enough if she were just the common law wife of a billionaire's son, right? That's enough to tell you in any country, basically, you're going to get away with it, or at least not suffer any real harm for doing something. In Belize, you have to understand, Michael Ashcroft isn't just a billionaire. His wealth is twice the GDP of the country. He is far and away the wealthiest, most powerful, most influential individual, Belizean or otherwise. He owns or has owned or has controlled, because here's where they try and catch me in their various financial bear traps, which is that he's like, in the opaque world of offshore finance, like the companies are always owned by companies, which are owned by companies, which are owned by holding companies, which are owned by trusts, which are registered in the Bermuda Exchange, right? So they can always say, we don't own that. But for all intents and purposes, he has tremendous power and influence. And for all of those reasons, basically, he is, if not certainly one of a very tiny group of the most influential people in Belize. So now imagine who Jasmine Harton is. Mm-hmm. You would think he would just snap his fingers and she would be back in her luxury hotel room and she would never have to worry about this again. And that's what episode 1 is. And I think where we tried to end it was, yeah, sure, I may have told you that this is an accident, but that's not the mystery we're going to investigate. The mystery we're going to investigate is what the hell is going on here? Like, why does this woman not walk out? And in fact, not just not walk out, is dragged deeper and deeper and deeper into what seems to be this plot against her to destroy her in some way.
Yeah, because that's what I was going to say is like what actually you see is the power of the Ashcrofts, but it was against Jasmine.
Right. And it's what happens when that power is not used ethically to support you, but to destroy you. And, he's a very litigious person, and we've had to be very careful with what we claim we know and don't know. And so what I should say is, like, we have no evidence that Michael Ashcroft has ordered any specific actions or improper activities by Belizean authorities to work against Jasmine. However, it sure appears that over the past, we're now through we're 3 years later. It sure seems like almost every force in Belize has worked against her. Now, Michael Ashcroft isn't the only person who might want that. So Henry was a cop. So you can imagine that maybe the commissioner of police, Chester Williams, who's become one of her many foils, maybe he also doesn't like Jasmine because he loved Henry, or he thinks that she killed a cop and she shouldn't get away with it because she's a rich white lady. And because Michael Ashcroft also doesn't seem to like her, then Chester can do whatever he wants. And now you can imagine, like, well, maybe some of the judges don't like her either. Maybe the Jamaat family understandably wouldn't like her. And Henry's sister is a cop. And a lot of the institutional forces start to press in on her.
Yeah, so can we just sort of talk a little bit about what those forces are? Like, let's even start with like the justice system. What do you start to notice about the apparently, blind justice and the way it's treating Jasmine, or she's sort of what she faces?
Yeah, it's an almost, I can say we could talk about this for hours and people will still say, like, come on, really, how bad? And I think what the podcast hopefully does is that it continually escalates in ways that you're like, no, that can't also have happened. Like, or like some of it. So starting at the beginning is, okay, if it's an accident, she should have just paid bail and gotten out. Well, she didn't get bail. She spends more nights in jail than she should have. And not only does she not get bail, they then send her to the worst prison in Belize, which, by the way, was in the Netflix special World's Worst Prisons, sleeping on a concrete floor with no pillow, a bucket in the corner, being the lights on. They're playing footage of Henry's funeral over the louds. Like, she's being essentially psychologically tortured in a prison. So what's happening there. Whether she's rich or not rich, manslaughter by negligence charge, you should not be spending multiple nights in a prison after you've posted bail.
Yeah.
Bail is denied. So she's there more than a week, I think 8 days, in almost unimaginable conditions. And I don't expect people to feel worse for her than anyone else in that prison. The question is just, why was she in it? And we can certainly ask the question, like, why is anyone in that prison?
Why is anybody in it?
It's a horrific place. And then finally, she's allowed to post bail, and you think, well, okay, that was terrible, but maybe it was just this banana republic bureaucracy and they couldn't get the paperwork filed. So surely she's now going to go back to her condo and she's going to be with her kids and she's going to prepare to deal with this for the rest of her life. That's not what happened. So she's picked up at prison, driven to a compound in the opposite corner of the country from her own children, where she's kept essentially prisoner, although they claim not a prisoner. And then fast forwarding a little bit, I don't know if you have kids, I have kids. And one thing people have told me about the show, and especially women, have been like that this is ultimately the story about a woman fighting for her children. Much less about her survival than it is about a mother trying to get her kids back, which is, and I think we have a moment at the top of episode 5 where I say, if there's one thing I think arrogance of Michael, or at least Andrew Ashcroft's arrogance, created a blind spot, which is the lengths a mother will go to for her children, that there's almost nothing she won't do.
I just want to back up to that, because what is Andrew doing? Like, the other expectation is that her husband or partner is going to try to help her, but that isn't happening. Can you just tell me about what Andrew is doing as Andrew, but also what he's doing with the kids while she's stuck in this prison?
Right. So he brings the kids to see her exactly once. They were there for an afternoon. He tries to get her to sign custody papers during that visit, essentially giving him full custody. I should say allegedly, we don't have those documents. She says that that's what they were. I actually don't remember if he denied it or just didn't answer the question. We've had prolonged exchanges with his lawyers. Bottom line is, she's not allowed to see the kids. She can't leave this place, basically. He brings them one time. She has very sporadic contact with them. He's given her – so he's taken all of her things or not brought them to her, because it's not like the night of the shooting she's allowed to go up to the house and pack a bag. She doesn't really have any of her stuff. When he does bring her things, no money, no access to her bank accounts, a phone that can only call 2 people, himself and her father, who is a whole nother story but is basically not helping her at all. A laptop that's been seemingly cleaned of most of its files, but becomes a lifeline because she does use ultimately the laptop to get to WhatsApp, to start to be able to communicate with people. And that's how she gets in touch with her mother, who immediately packs a bag and gets on a plane and comes down. So her mother, back in Canada, by the way, is watching all this from afar, having no contact with her daughter, is trying to get in touch with Andrew to say, how's Jasmine? And Andrew is not calling her back. So by all appearances, what he's done is he has either put her there or supported a move to put her in this house. He's obviously distancing himself and starting to formally, as we would later find out, disengage her from the properties or start to move on anything that would officially connect her to the family, basically icing her out in every possible way.
And one of the things that really shocked me was, stepping ahead of a bit, she finally does get a quote unquote decent lawyer. And then I thought, okay, good. She's got this dude. Although you do such a nice job of stringing us along, because he's just all of a sudden becomes he never answers his phone. And I was just like, what the hell? But eventually, it actually even comes out that it's alleged, but it does seem like even the Ashcrofts got to him.
Well, that's a trickier one because they vehemently deny that one, and he does too. All I can say is that Jasmine believes that it's true.
Right.
But for a year or more, she was working with him, and he was very useful to us. I found him to be a pretty good lawyer. He's a fascinating character, really charismatic. But he was saying things to me like, something is going on here that is not right. I think he says, I would encourage the journalists of Belize to look into this, because we should look at, I think, one day in particular, because it's so telling of what she went through, which is that when her mom gets to Belize, Jasmine has now realized basically what's going on. We're talking about it all as if she knew from day one. She kind of didn't. It was like one of those movie scenes where when it clicks and then they like replay all these memories,
Yeah.
suddenly everything that's happened makes sense. And like she kind of described it to me as it just happens one day. And I think maybe it's when she's like, wait, no, Andrew's not helping me. He's like working against me. So then her mom comes to her aid. They leave the jungle fortress. I mean, like they're not blocked fully. It's not like the guy tackles her when she tries to get around. Like her mom shows up. They're like, we are leaving. You can try and stop us if you want. Andrew, of course, acts as if like, what are you doing? This is crazy. Why would you leave the house? You have everything you want there, like good food, and it's got a great view.
A great view.
The mom has what I think is a probably radical, but perhaps in the moment good idea, which is we are going to go straight to Andrew and we're going to film it. So they journey out to San Pedro. They have the cameras rolling, and they essentially try and bust in to see the kids and confront Andrew. He runs away. They have it on video. The security stops them from entering. She's like, I'm the owner of this place. My children are here. My possessions are here. They're not allowed in. Her mom puts it on Facebook. It pings around the world. It becomes, for people in England following the story, it becomes quite a big new twist in the story. But what happens when she goes to check in the next day is that the police file 2 new charges and remand her back to jail. And those charges are assault for assaulting the general manager of the hotel, who you can clearly see on the video is never assaulted, but they say that like she made threatening gestures. Or now that general manager, should be pointed out, works for Andrew Ashcroft. So you can imagine maybe she was pushed a little bit. And the other wildly shady thing that happened is that the second charge is for drug possession. And not drug possession in that moment, drug possession on the night of the shooting. So here we are, I think it's 3 weeks later. The cops are like, oh, wait, by the way, we're now going to charge you for the cocaine that we found on you the night of the shooting that we didn't ever mention, and that's not in any of the photographs, and it's not logged in with all your belongings. Like the color of your underwear is literally here. That's true. I've seen it. But there's no cocaine. So now here we are 3 weeks later, 2 new charges, which, as Dickie Bradley, the lawyer, says to me at the time, surely the point of this was to violate her bail, get her remanded back to prison, because what she's done is she's caused a scene. She's now upset all these people. She's like, the nice, tidy, like, we're just going to push you farther and farther and farther and farther away until you just shut up and stop trying to get your kids back and just leave us alone. That beautiful piece has been violated when they go shoot this video. It goes up on the internet. It becomes embarrassing. 2 new charges miraculously arrive. And unfortunately, because Belize's justice system is a bit of a mess, that didn't work because for some procedural reason I can't even remember now. So anyway, she doesn't go immediately back to prison, thankfully. But something else then happens, which is the guy who put her bail up, who was another general manager of the hotel and therefore also worked for Andrew Ashcroft, walks into court and says, I want to withdraw my bail. And says, I'm worried that she's a flight risk now. So then she does go back to prison and probably would have been there for a long time because she doesn't have a bank card. She doesn't have access to finances. Her mom is broke. Like a good Samaritan comes forward on the Monday and puts the bail up. And that becomes a recurring theme. It turns out to be a woman who Jasmine had never met before, who had just been following the story and says, enough is enough. I'm helping this woman out. And that's kind of when the story starts to turn.
Yeah, and the thing that I appreciated, you talked about the mom being a bit of a hero. There were some women that really stepped in and sort of saved her. But before we get to that, can I just ask you, like, you know, it's been set up that Andrew isn't the brightest guy in the world, that probably doesn't think too far ahead, but his father's pretty bright. I mean, do you think that I appreciate that we don't know this, but with all the research that you've done and the work that you've looked into this, was this happening at the behest of Andrew or maybe his father?
This is purely my opinion.
Yeah.
And this is entirely speculation based on no evidence because I don't know if Michael Ashcroft has ever done anything here.
Yeah.
Here's what I think. I think if I'm Michael Ashcroft, this was really embarrassing. And probably if he did anything at some point, he said to Andrew, like, just fix this. I don't want to hear about it anymore. This woman is annoying. And like, this is embarrassing what's happening to you. And you're screwing up again, just like you always do. In my mind, that's all he had to do. And then Andrew is like, who by every account I've ever heard, and by the way, no one wants to talk about him on the record, but I've talked to a lot of people off the record and on background, worships his father, is terrified of his father, would not do anything without his father's approval. I think that what happened is then he's just like, I gotta fix this. I gotta do whatever I can to like make dad happy, and that means I'm gonna manage this situation. But Andrew, not being a very bright guy, being a guy who's struggled with demons and is maybe often his own worst enemy, is like not very good at it.
Yeah.
Right? And like isn't able to execute whatever plan he might have had, even if that plan is just, I'm going to put her in this house and she's just, she'll just go away eventually. And the kids, I'll just take the kids to Turks and Caicos and we'll give her a couple $1,000 a month and she'll visit periodically and it'll be fine. And of course, no competent parent who loves their children would agree to that. But that's my theory.
And Jasmine is so tenacious. I mean, she really is something.
One of the most formidable people I've ever
really
encountered.
I mean, he had no idea what he was going to face by going after her.
She has been to hell and back and has stood up to basically every force that could be thrown at her and has just continually bounced back. I've seen her break down a few times, but she's also, and I think one reason some people have trouble being more empathetic but not sympathetic to her is because she sounds very composed all the time. She's very strong-willed and even-tempered and composed, and so she often seems like, where's the emotion in this woman? I have seen it. Like, she does break down sometimes, but I think has the courage and the heart of a warrior, and I think everyone underestimated what she'd be capable of enduring and continues to this day. So, yeah, I mean, to go back to your original question, I kind of think Michael Ashcroft, his personal involvement in this has been somewhat minimal, other than telling Andrew to, like, take care of stuff, and then it's mostly been Andrew. And I think some amount of the bureaucratic, legal, law enforcement hell that she's been subjected to is probably Belize. And I actually think a similar dynamic happens in Belize than the one I just described to you between Andrew and Michael. I can also imagine, let's say that Andrew Ashcroft has never issued an order to a police officer or a judge or a politician. Like, very possible, right? We certainly can't prove that. I can't tell you that he's corrupted these officials. I think there's another way that it works, which is that all of those people are in some way afraid of, in debt to, understanding that they need his father and his money and his power in Belize to for the good of their careers, whatever. Therefore, isn't it also possible that they might be acting in a way that they think he wants them to act, right? So even if he hasn't ever said to a cop, trump up charges, like, and I have no evidence that happened, to me, or at least plausible, that the cops might be like Andrew, where they're like, well, it's pretty clear that this guy doesn't like this woman and like kind of wants us to help get rid of her. So why don't we just, like, it's Belize. We can get away with this shit. And by the way, Belize is wildly corrupt and has, problems throughout its judiciary and the law enforcement. And we have a whole episode about Belize and how corrupt it is. And so I think there's a dynamic between Andrew and Michael that's also true between Belize and Michael, which
interesting. Yeah.
That everybody kind of thinks that they know what he wants and that they might be trying to give it to him, even if he has never once said to anybody, take care of this. Because I also think he's smart. I think he's savvy. I think he's gotten very far. He's self-made. I don't think he's stupid. I don't think he would, like, send an email to the commissioner of police being like, I need you to make up a cocaine charge. He's just not stupid. He wouldn't do that. I don't even think he would suggest such a thing. But can I imagine that a cop might be like, well, that other thing failed. This is Belize. Like, we make shit up all the time. Let's just make up a drug charge.
Make up another drug charge.
And by the way, I have no problem defaming the Belizean police and judiciary.
You hinted at it, but eventually, like, how long does it take for her to get any kind of answers? And, what's the end of her legal battle look like?
Yeah, we could talk for hours and not even get through all the twists. It's a
I
12
know.
episode series,
It's
which
so
is,
twisty and turny. It's incredible.
and it's sort of like how much could happen, and the answer would be a lot more than I expected to happen.
Yeah.
And I feel like I was saying to someone the other day, like, I hope people are as interested in this as I am. And he said, anyone who has a fucked up family or has been through a bad breakup is going to love this because it's like the worst breakup story of all time.
Worst.
And it's like the worst family drama in history.
It really is.
But basically, I've given away the ending in a sense, which is that, like, I believed her from the beginning that the shooting of Henry Jemot was a terrible accident, right? I mean, and I think she's legitimately very remorseful about it. And there was a pretty flattering mention in the New Yorker the other day, but it said something like the shooting may be given short shrift, and it's definitely a criticism I take to heart. But the reality to me was that wasn't the central mystery we were following, and I try and be respectful to that situation and Henry whenever we can. And we do have an episode very late in the series where we spend an entire 40 minutes unpacking what happened that night, what I think happened, what could have happened, Jasmine's relationship with Henry, and where it goes from there. And then ultimately, the series...
Just to highlight it so people can know and we're not giving everything away, but that he was teaching her how to use a gun. And things went awry.
In short, he had helped her in a previous encounter when she was almost sexually assaulted. He told her, you need to learn how to defend yourself. I'm going to teach you how to use a gun.
Right.
The gun misfired.
Right.
And Henry had been drinking.
Right.
So we did follow the case through its ultimate resolution. Her charge was never upped, even though she thought that it would perhaps happen. One of her many paranoias was, I'm going to go in there and they're suddenly going to change the charge to murder. Like, she really thought that could happen at various points because everyone in her mind is compromised, including judges, prosecutors. So she's like, it's Belize. What's to stop them from just saying, sorry, you're now charged with first-degree murder. And here's a witness who says you told them that you did it.
Right.
And by the way, I'm going to be very careful with what I say here, but I'm told there is audio of certain people encouraging witnesses to lie, which I'm trying to get a hold of and will be incorporating into the series if I do. And one of the lies that the witness is being encouraged to say is, I need you to say that Jasmine told you that she killed him on purpose.
Wow.
And I have heard that from numerous people.
Jeez.
Ultimately, it does go to court. The original charge, manslaughter by negligence, which is, by the way, I believe the same charge that Alec Baldwin is charged with. And I actually used that in episode 10 as a pretty analogous situation of a person who fires a weapon that kills another person who should not be responsible for that weapon being loaded. So in Alec Baldwin's situation, it's an armorer on the set hands him a gun that's supposed to have blanks in it. He points it at the person he's supposed to point it at. It discharges and kills that person. That's not Alec Baldwin's fault. I mean, you may not like, and it's analogous in another way to me, which is that a lot of people just don't like Alec Baldwin. And I think in Belize, a lot of people don't like Jasmine Harton. In her case, Henry Jemot is a cop. It's his service weapon. He's responsible for that service weapon being in his possession at all times. And this is really uncomfortable. And I don't say this to like besmirch Henry Jemot in any way. I think it's terrible what happened. And I'm very sad for his family. But he's the responsible one in that situation, right? He's a cop. It's his weapon. I mean, we could call 20 cops and say, are you supposed to hand your service weapon to anyone ever? And what about if you're drinking? The answer is absolutely not, and you could be fired for it, right? And I'm not saying Henry was, of course he didn't know, I'm sure he thought it was unloaded and he handed it to her and it discharged and it killed him, and that's terrible. It's very similar to what Alec Baldwin went through. So they both are charged with negligence in these deaths, and I think, I'm not sure either of them should have been, but both were. She pled guilty. Should she have? It's arguable. I think if you asked her, she was just sick of it and wanted to get out of Belize and see her kids because, one of the many things that happens in the story is that Andrew manages to get custody, and those custody proceedings were
awful, shocking.
Yeah, I mean, we could talk for hours about the custody court and whether it was compromised. It sure seems like it was.
Yeah.
He announces by press release one day after he's given custody that he's going to Turks and Caicos with the kids. Well, Jasmine can't leave Belize because of a charge. She doesn't have a passport. It's being held by the court. So Andrew's just like, sorry, I'm leaving. I'm taking the kids. So she's now stuck in Belize in this, as you said, like Kafkaesque legal, like there's delays and adjournments and all kinds of things keep happening that seem to be if not intentionally keeping her there, at least the inertia of the Belizean system, which often I've been told prisoners could spend 5 years in prison on remand just waiting to get in front of a judge because there aren't enough judges. It's a pretty violent place. There's a huge backlog. So I think by the time Jasmine got into a court, she's just like, fuck it. Can I say that? Can I swear?
On this podcast, you can. Yep.
All right. I will plead guilty if it means I can go see my kids. But of course, you've heard the last episode, so it's not that simple.
Yeah. Ugh, it's so
she pleads
sad.
guilty. In theory, what happens when you plead guilty is, you are given a sentence and hers is a fine. There's no prison time. It's a fine and some other things. And you pay the fine and you get your passport back and you leave the country and you go see your kids and not happily ever after. But at least at that point, she hadn't seen her kids in 14 months. So you could hug your kids. But there was like one final, I was going to say indignity. It's like a series of them. Getting out of Belize was quite an adventure.
Almost impossible. Yeah. So I kept thinking, why doesn't she get on a boat, go somewhere else, fly to Canada, and sue the shit out of him?
Well, until the custody is resolved,
I guess she can't.
That's the problem. She can't do anything. She's really been, arguably hasn't always done this, but I think in most cases has tried to be careful and acted in a way that preserves her case for custody because that was never actually honored in Belize, which is children born out of wedlock. This is in the Belizean laws.
Oh, yeah.
The mother is the default custodian. And that Belize just threw that out the window and gave them to Andrew, and she had to fight to get them back, and she lost at every turn, and ultimately he's given custody, even though it's an accident. She's had no other than the trumped up charges, no subsequent violations. She doesn't do anything. She just stays in a house with her mom. Every time she appears for a hearing, the court essentially rules against her. She, even to this day, now the custody proceedings have moved on to Turks and Caicos, and there's a gag on her at the moment, so she's actually not allowed to talk to me or anyone else about the ongoing custody proceedings. But, she still wants to fight until she gets at least shared custody so that they have equal. I mean, she said to me a million times, and this is, pretty incredible. You've heard what she's been through, is that I'll sign tomorrow for joint custody and I will forgive all of this stuff. I just want to stop this fighting and I'll live on this side of the island and you live on that side. And it's a pretty incredible thing to say once you listen to the show and understand what she's been through.
Yeah,
to just say, you know what, I can forget all of that stuff if you just give me my kids. That's all I want. And I think peace, I got to imagine how many good night's sleep has that woman had in the last 3 years.
Yeah.
It's pretty incredible. But she, when I talk to her now, and we still talk quite a bit because the story kind of continues, she definitely seems much happier, at least being in the same country as her children and seeing them regularly.
How about Andrew?
Well, I was going to say, because someone asked me this morning, and I think it's an important, Jasmine is obviously a source we talk to over a long period, repeatedly, hundreds of times. I've obviously had a lot of access to her. Someone asked me this morning, do you trust her? Why do you trust her? And I said, well, I've been talking to her for 3 years. I've never once caught her in a lie. Does that mean she's never lied to me? No. But I'm a journalist, and I've certainly asked for evidence of everything that I could possibly ask for it for. Now, there are plenty of things that are 100% he said, she said. But the he said, Andrew, I have numerous cases of him being dishonest, including in some settings where he shouldn't be. Jasmine, I've never caught her in a lie. So I'm I went into this thinking, I don't know, there's going to be some skeleton in this closet, or there's going to be a piece of evidence that I didn't see, or something is going to be brought forth that's going to surprise me. And it has never happened. So it's I do trust her. And I think that people who, especially in Belize, probably, who feel why are we giving this woman a platform? I didn't set out to give her a platform. I thought I was doing a story about a shooting, and I ended up doing this absurd family drama. And I think one of the major themes in the story is it's a lens into this world of corruption and colonialism and financial colonialism and power and what that means. And there's a thing you haven't heard that's now going to be at the end of episode 11, where one of the other women in the story ends up staring down power in Belize and being crushed by it. And she wrote to me and said, like, thank you for doing White Devil. It's the story of every woman in Belize.
Do you have any hopes that maybe now this is a little bit more out in the open, that there'll be some kind of shift either in Belize or maybe with Andrew? Like,
I would love to, and I mean this earnestly. I would still love to interview him. Like, I hope so. You know, Joe, my producer, and I were talking the other day, and I was like, I kind of wonder if Michael Ashcroft dropped dead tomorrow of a heart attack, would Andrew just be like, you know what, let's give it up. Let's just share the kids. You know, I'll try and settle you out for whatever your share of Alaya is. And let's just, I kind of wonder, like, if it's got to be exhausting to be him, which is someone who must always feel disappointed in himself because he feels like his father doesn't respect him, doesn't love him, doesn't, you know, whatever their relationship is, my perception of it is that he probably feels like he's always letting his dad down. And he has fairly done that. But, like, I wonder what kind of childhood Andrew Ashcroft had.
mm-hmm.
You know, I got a very interesting email from a guy who was like, I went to this camp with Andrew Ashcroft, and I've never forgiven my parents for sending me there. It's one of these wilderness, like, scared straight camps. And it's affiliated with the same one that Paris Hilton is now out talking about. Now, Paris's experience was horrific, and this guy says his wasn't as bad as hers. But that tells me a lot about what Andrew may have put up with as a kid, which is, like, I don't know what he did as a teenager that got him sent to this school, but I've read about these places, and if not, like, physically abused, psychologically abused, it's a terrible place. So it's a very long way of saying, like, I kind of wonder if he just wants peace too. If he would just tomorrow say, let's just never fight again.
Let's just be.
And I also wonder what's going to happen to all the Ashcroft dynasty, the empire, because I don't think Andrew's up to running it. It's hard for me to imagine a second Michael Ashcroft. I think most of it probably goes away. He's already started moving some things into trusts, and he's like, it seems to be to some extent solidifying his legacy and making sure things are in the right hands. And I wouldn't leave like $1 billion to Andrew.
But also probably not appreciative of your podcast when he's worrying about his legacy.
I don't think he's the biggest fan. Although, one very amusing thing, I guess. I don't know what word to use. It's the lowest stakes twist in the series, but it, in my opinion, is one of the most satisfying ones. Basically, Michael Ashcroft managed a rhythm and blues band at one point.
Oh yeah,
we discover this incredible thing. And I won't give too much away, but remember the band, Chris Alton, the British guy who like recorded the music that you hear. So he has like an album of Trident. And if you go to his website, you can buy it. I hope we've sold him some records. Michael Ashcroft's PR guy ordered 2 copies of the album last week.
Love it.
So I know they're listening.
That's awesome.
I know it, and I've certainly had some lovely correspondence with attorneys.
I'm sure. Okay, well, Josh, on that note, I hope everybody goes and listens who hasn't. And thanks for your work, and thanks for joining us.
Of course.
You've been listening to Crime Story from CBC Podcasts. We drop a new episode every Monday. You can get our next episode a week early on CBC Podcast's YouTube channel or by subscribing to the CBC Podcast True Crime channel on Apple Podcasts. In addition to early access, subscribers to our True Crime channel also listen ad-free. Crime Story is written and hosted by me. Our producers are Alexis Green and Sarah Clayton. Sound design by Graham McDonald. Our senior producer is Jeff Turner. Our video producer is Evan Agard. Our YouTube producer is John Lee. Executive producers are Cecil Fernandez and Chris Oak. Tanya Springer is CBC Podcast Senior Manager, and Arif Noorani is the Director of CBC Podcasts.